Kano is one of the UK's best rappers and has been for a long time. Kano released his debut album Home Sweet Home in 2005, another project which I'll definitely cover soon. This Is England is a track of a more recent album, Made in the Manor. On it he has commentary on issues he sees, but he balances it out with optimism. He mentions Reggie Kray early on. Ronald Ronnie Kray and Reginald Reggie Kray were twins and led organised crime in the East End of London during the 1950s and 1960s. They led a gang called The Firm, and the Krays were involved in murder, armed robbery, arson, protection rackets and assaults. Kano is from East London, a link he uses to signify that he's capable of gaining the same power as the Kray twins, but if he goes off the beaten path, he'll succumb to crime. And he expands this in the second line with East London, who am I to mess tradition up? A rhetoric asking, does he really have a choice in his own future, or is it disrespect to not learn from the past? Jellied eels, pies of many flavours and mashed potatoes are English food staples. London Pride is also an ale brewed in the place called Chiswick. When he says 2 pints of that pride on tap, it's also a potential metaphor that he consumes tradition and pays attention to the past as well as the present. ASBO, or antisocial behavioural orders, used to be given out to people older than 10 as a sort of restraining order from a judge. They're no longer given out, but Kano's mention of it here is used to question the rules and their effectiveness. Supertenants on the park bench could be referring to how people become trapped inside alcoholism, referring to supertenants, the strong lager, and is also a reference to homeless people who tend to sleep on park benches. Proof that England still hasn't managed to help those most in need. Trying to be Tupac in the land of Suge was a reference to Tupac's honesty, wisdom and skill, and how even that is not enough to protect you in a world ruled by people like Suge Knight, who used intimidation and violence to force their way into authority. It's emphasized in that later line with trying to be straight in this town full of crooks, and this point is finally expanded in that Bentley line as well. Hard work is not the only path and only need to get ultimate success as such. There are an infinite other set of factors that determine your future. Work smart, not hard, is the key message here. The E15 postcode in Stratford, known as the Green, is another reference to East London. Many grime artists have come from East London, like Kano, including Dirty Goods, Tinchy Strider and Temper T, among others. Seeing as the song is called This Is England, the main point of this section in the verse is that you always gravitate towards home and familiar things to you in life, such as friends and family. However, it's not so easy all the time. Life gets in the way. And the rough here is a sports metaphor for golf where the ball gets stuck. Again, a metaphor for tough times. Tristan on the pre-chorus with wheels keep on turning, we keep on earning is a phrase that life goes on, that work never stops, and that money makes the world go around. Streets lead to wars and spies is both a reference to how gang violence is still not perfectly controlled and is ever present. And spies talking about foreign intelligence on British soil, essentially that in order for money to go around, someone needs to get their hands dirty. Straight as the Arrows flies, talking about the British Red Arrows, who are a specialised group of Air Force pilots that are considered some of the world's best. Tristan's point here is that hustlers in England are determined and work towards goals as needed. Back when Lethal Bizzle was Lethal B is a reference to Lethal Bizzle, who also came from East London, an MC who was part of the More Fire crew. He called himself Lethal B initially before changing it to Lethal Bizzle. To spit 16s was to spit 16 lines, or the equivalent of a verse, emphasising how artistry and skill was valued in these parties. The whole part of the chorus is also a throwback to Eminem's line from Drug Ballad, where he refers to Mark Wahlberg, who was part of the group Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, responsible for the hit Good Vibrations in 1991. Kano's line with where you could be a villain or a victim could be a reference on how sanity is weak in everyone. It merely takes 2 catastrophic events for most people to do unthinkable things, especially in desperate times. The Idiot's Guide to the Manor is a reference to how English land itself was developed in the past. Manorialism was an organizing principle of rural economies which vested legal and economic power into a lord of the manor. In essence, Kano's album title here talks about how he's the equivalent lord of East London. Startlingly relevant to today, Long Time Coming is a reference to the chorus of the 1964 Sam Cooke song A Change Is Gonna Come. That song was about the civil rights movement of 1954 to 1968 in America for equal rights for African Americans. Again, this is highly relevant to England, which is still dominantly Caucasian. There needs to be reforms even today on the way racism is subconsciously handled in society. That part about Rocky in verse 2 is about how Rocky trained by climbing the 72 stone steps leading up to the entrance of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, training for his fight with Apollo Creed. As Apollo at the time had been unbeaten with something those Apollos wouldn't know, Kano talks about how success can often be blinding and removes someone from the feeling of needing to work hard. The two people Kano refers to in verse 2 is firstly Nucky Thompson, a fictional character portrayed by Steve Buscemi, who is a corrupt New Jersey politician and also a gangster behind closed doors, who is surprisingly adored by the immigrant community for his charitable acts. Jack Johnson was a boxer who won in the fight of the century in 1910 against James Jeffries, a symbol of hope in the Jim Crow era in America. For reference, Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation in the southern United States. Kano, in essence, with this is saying that he is both unfairly seen as a villain because of his background, but due to that can also be seen as a hero that has inspired the next generation. In that last part of verse 2, Kano could be questioning how much is worth sacrificing for money. People often in greed sacrifice too much that results them in dying, as he says with the line, "Now what will come first, getting rich or dying?" It could also be a reference to 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Trying, and also the metaphor that life isn't worth living unless you attain utter success. Violins were often symbolized in the Renaissance period as debts or the devil's accessory in paintings of the time, because supposedly only pacts with the devil could give one such skill to play the violin at a high level. With this part in the bridge, Kano talks about the core tradition or the past. It's fundamentally talking about how these things are some of the items that make up a bigger portion of that thing, for better or for worse. This is England, the country where around 22% of its people are in poverty and 34% of children are. Yet it has 2.4 million people who are worth more than $1 million. This is England, where the percentage difference in median hourly pay between people of a white ethnicity and those who belong to an ethnic minority group is largest in London at 21.7%. England has its good parts, but as said, there will always be corruption, violence and other tensions that are present. It's our responsibility to first be aware and then be willing to adopt change. Without those two things and clinging on to the unethical parts of tradition, we can't hope to improve as a functioning society. This is England, where there's a mix of villains and victims, as Kano said, who each have their own hopes and dreams.